Having been a rabbi for a long time now, I think that was for you. Your Royal Highness, I've had the opportunity to interview many people, mostly Jews, and the reason I don't feel uncomfortable is they think of themselves as royalty as well. And so this is not an unfamiliar position for me, although it is nice to actually interview someone who is royalty. And I want to ask at first about this sort of anomalous position you find yourself in. We had the opportunity to have lunch. You said that you were just interviewed in New York, which was the first synagogue that you had ever stepped into, and this is the first time that you've ever had a public dialogue with a rabbi. And I wonder how your community is reacting to that change in normal protocol.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, salam, shalom. I understand there are many people of Iranian origin here as well. So I will say Huda Hafiz. And I want to thank Dr. Novik for not only his introduction, but the fact that he's not only a shaker, but he's a mover. And definitely his contribution to my being here is enormous, as is the work of the Israel Peace Forum that has been the vehicle and the means by which I'm invited to this congregation and to meet this rabbi, the first rabbi I sit down and speak with in this manner. And in answer to his question, which will have to be repeated again, please.
To put it in the vernacular, are you taking flak for this?
If I were taking flak, I would say that I was having some impact. Fortunately for me, I think all that I have heard, not just from back home, but in most of the commentary that has come about as a result of the new social media and the fact that people can communicate instantaneously with events, has been go ahead and good luck. So I'm reassured that at least when I go back home, that I will not need to wear a flak jacket, but rather look forward to having more discussion, and there will be people who will be inquisitive and curious as to how it is to sit down with a rabbi, and what kind of audience did I have, what the reflection is, and so on. So I'm very encouraged by the feedback that I've had from those who took the time to make comments on social media.
So I think I'd like to begin, although we'll cover, I hope, a range of issues with the Middle East situation, with the Israeli-Palestinian and larger situation. I take this opportunity, by the way, for a small announcement for the AIPAC Policy Conference, which is March 4th to 6th in Washington. Sinai each year takes a very large delegation, and I hope you'll all sign up outside after you fill out your Sinai membership form. The question I want to ask is, to start off with, it is clear that over the past decades, let's say since the '67 war, there has been, apart from with Egypt, there's really no movement on the peace front. If we're assigning blame, which is something that I think all sides like to do, to whom would you assign the greatest proportion of blame for that gridlock? And, well, I'll start with that.
Well, you mentioned AIPAC.
Yes.
And I hope those of you who sign up to attend whatever AIPAC meeting may take place anywhere is to urge them to press Israeli leaders to accept the Arab Peace Initiative and to negotiate whatever terms they can get from the Arabs, as the Arabs will negotiate with them and get whatever terms they can from them. And as you know, the Rabbi mentioned the 67 war. In June 1967, in July or August 1967, the Arab leaders met in Khartoum in the Sudan and issued a statement that said, no peace, no negotiations, no recognition of Israel. This was 1967. By 1981, because of developments around the world, and particularly in the Middle East, the Lebanese Civil War, the start of the Iran-Iraq War, etc., other developments that had taken place, the late King Fahd, for the first time, proposed what was then called the 8-point program for peace in the Middle East. So instead of saying no peace, he moved to inquiring after and seeking peace. And the major breakthrough in that initial 8-point program was that he put a line in there that said, accepting the status quo in the geographic area post-1967. So it was the first time reference to Israel as a state in the Arab world, when before that we were taught in school and on the radio and television and the media and everything that there was no such thing as an Israeli state. And it was even called the alleged state of Israel. I'm sure many of you who are old enough to remember that will remember it. And from that first step that the late King Fahd took, and he got finally the agreement of all Arab states to this statement, in 2002, the late King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia again initiated what has come to be known as the Arab Peace Initiative, in which not only is Israel mentioned by name, but also the offer is that in return for Israel's withdrawal from the lands occupied in 1967, that all the Arab countries will end hostilities with Israel, will recognize Israel, have normal relations with Israel, and hopefully go forward to a peaceful engagement with the people, not just of Israel, but in the world in general. In addition to the 22 Arab countries that have offered that directly to the state of Israel, a couple of years later, the rest of the Muslim world, which is composed of 57 countries, equally committed to the peace process according to the Arab Peace Initiative. What happened from the Israeli side? Nothing. No acceptance, no reflection, no response, except a few statements that came out of the late Shimon Peres, in which he said there are some articles of the Arab Peace Initiative that are acceptable and we can work with them. Mr. Olmert, when he was Prime Minister of Israel, also gave a similar statement. But no Israeli leader has come forward and said, let us sit down and talk about what the Arab Peace Initiative offers Israel. All is negotiable, whether it is return of refugees, whether it is borders, security, you name it. It is on the table to be taken up and negotiated. And this is where I think the Israeli Peace Forum has been so courageous in promoting the idea that there is an Israeli portion to the Arab Peace Initiative, which is the acceptance of the two-state solution and the fact that both countries, Palestine and Israel, can live side by side in peace and harmony, hopefully for the rest of the world. So this is where it stands. No Israeli leader has come forward to say, yes, we will negotiate with the Arabs on the Arab Peace Initiative.
So without going through the details of the initiative, let me ask general questions about the reception of it. First of all, do you believe that the peoples in the countries that signed on as governments would support such an initiative? That is, if you took a plebiscite of the Muslim world, do you think that they would support the initiative?
I think yes, and I think there are surveys that have shown that the Arab world as a people supports the Arab Peace Initiative. There are many surveys that were taken by independent organizations, not official ones in the Arab world, and I would trust the independent ones. And also, if you look at the surveys made particularly of the Palestinian people and the West Bank particularly, consistently, since the Arab Peace Initiative was presented in 2002, I think between the numbers that I remember in my head is between 58 and 62% of the Palestinians accept the two-state solution, as do in some terms the Israelis that have been surveyed in Israel as to their view of the two-state solution. So you have the popular will is there on both sides to have this two-state solution enacted. But it needs the political courage on the part, I think, of the Israeli leadership to come forward and accept their people's acceptance of the two-state solution.
So analyze for me the difference between Sadat and the way that he was able to mobilize and galvanize the Israeli population to make an enormous geographical concession to the Egyptians, and the fact that the Arab Peace Initiative, I'm going to turn it back to your side, has not been able to convince the Israeli public in the same way, and there is not really an identifiable figure in the way there was in the time of Sadat I mean, it could be because of Sadat's fate that there isn't such a figure.
I don't think so. I think the issue there is that, of course, the drama of Sadat's visit to Jerusalem cannot be reenacted in any way to have the same effect as it did when he did it. The response to the Arab Peace Initiative on the part of Israeli leadership has not encouraged even the thinking of any Arab leader that they would emulate President Sadat, because they saw no interest on the part of the Israeli leadership in engaging with this offer that, from the Arab point of view, was equally dramatic and presented where? Presented at a very important Arab summit in Beirut in 2002, when there was opposition to it among those leaders. In Syria, there was opposition. Mr. Arafat at the time, late Arafat, had to be convinced. Places like Libya and some other places in the Arab world were reluctant to come along. But it took the diplomacy and the skill of the late King Abdullah that managed to get full support from all the Arab leaders in that summit meeting. If there had been a positive response by the Israeli leadership, one can speculate what would have followed from that, but I don't think that we can compare what President Sadat did and what was done in 2002, because the situation had changed dramatically from those days.
And from your point of view, why was there no response from the Israeli leadership?
I can only speculate. I was not there to discuss it with the late Mr. Sharon or any of his supporters. But his advisor at that time, and his name is Dov Weissglass, I don't know if, I'm sure some of you know him, he was the only one who commented publicly on this initiative at the time, in which he described it as being the most dangerous proposition for Israel's security. So that was taken as an indication that Mr. Sharon didn't like it. And subsequently, of course, neither Mr. Barak nor Mr. Olmert, none of the Israeli leaders who came to represent the Israeli people, and definitely not Mr. Netanyahu, has made any or given any indication that they're willing to sit down and discuss the Arab people. I remember once, this was very interesting for me because it was at the Munich Security Conference, I think 3 years ago or 4 years ago, when the then Israeli minister in charge of negotiating with the Palestinians was Ms. Tzipi Livni. And she was on a discussion group like this, and I was sitting in the audience, and with her was Sadat and Arafat and 2 other distinguished gentlemen who were negotiating or talking about the Palestinian-Israeli issue. And I remember at the end of the discussion, I posed a question to Ms. Tzipi Livni. I asked her, Ms. Livni, why don't you accept the Arab Peace Initiative? And she went through a very convoluted argument about Israeli security, about historic facts, about all sorts of things without answering my very simple question. And then I told her, Ms. Livni, all it takes is for you to say yes. And immediately, her immediate response was no. So to me, that was shocking, because here was a chance for her, as being responsible for the Israeli side of the negotiations with the Palestinians, to accept the Arab Peace Initiative and to go forward on that. But she said no. I saw her last year in Davos this time, and she had come around to the fact that the Arab Peace Initiative should be discussed by the Israelis, but she is no longer in office.
And at what point during the initiative does it suggest that the countries involved will recognize Israel as a legitimate state?
It doesn't, and I think this is one of the things that could be negotiated. I've heard...
May I just, my follow-up to that, which is the reason I asked, is, are you aware, since your knowledge of diplomatic history is infinitely greater than my own, are you aware of any other negotiation that doesn't have as a precondition, I am actually negotiating with another state, but says, after we negotiate, we'll see whether I recognize you as another state?
In the peace initiative itself, it says that there will be recognition accorded to Israel.
Eventually.
Yeah, when all the other issues are negotiated.
But again, I ask you diplomatically, has there ever been a negotiation where somebody doesn't recognize the other state they're negotiating with at the outset of the negotiation?
I can give you an example. Vietnam. Mr. Kissinger negotiated with them without the U.S. recognizing the North Vietnamese government. And they reached an agreement.
We were losing pretty badly at the time, as I recall.
Well, maybe that's it. You're not suggesting that Israel should be losing.
No. I'm just saying hard cases make bad law. But go ahead.
But that was an example. Yes. So yes, there are precedents for that. And I don't think we should be held by precedent. Are we accepting that the struggle continues, that the killing of Jews and Arabs continues, that we can't sit down with each other like this, like you and I are sitting down, and talk about scientific development, tourism, business opportunities, medical advances? All of these things are available to us with the Israelis if they would just sit down and negotiate and go on to having peace. And this is the bigger vision, I think, that needs to be looked at as an end game. And if there's going to be nitpicking in the meantime in the negotiations, fine, let it be there. But don't deny the wider populations, whether they're Arab or Jewish, the possibility of stopping the killing. All of us want to have an end to the killing that is taking place.
I know that there will be people, I am now preempting a criticism I'm about to get later, I know that there will be people who will want me to object to the initiative in all sorts of ways. But I actually don't think that it's worthwhile to use your valuable time to debate with you when, for most of us, it's very rare to have the opportunity to hear what you think, as opposed for you to hear what we think. So instead of saying, these are all the reasons why it won't work, let me ask you if you can think of a way in which you could galvanize this to work in a way that hasn't happened now. Between 2002 and 2017, that's 15 years, and there's been no movement. So how does this get moving?
I'm one person. I think the Israeli Peace Forum is one way of going directly to the Israeli public and engaging with them, and hopefully by doing that and having media support and the support of people like yourself perhaps and other leaders of the Jewish faith, not just in Israel but abroad, will put pressure on the Israeli leadership, even the present one, in order to get them to accept, to take it up. But I cannot tell you that anything that I will do personally or that I can envisage some magic wand that I can direct at or point at a specific event that will convince Israeli leaders to come forward.
Well, let me ask you about a possible complication of it. And I want to say that although the Israeli Policy Forum is obviously sponsoring this event, I want to allow them to speak for themselves. I don't want to say that they hold my view or His Royal Highness's view. We can ask Nimrod afterwards or David Halperin what they agree and don't agree with. But one of the things that I think most negotiators on the opposite side would say they're concerned about is, does there exist on the Palestinian side a cohesive and authoritative leadership with whom to negotiate? We can negotiate with the leadership of Saudi Arabia or other countries, but the Palestinians present a somewhat different case, no?
You know, when Abu Mazen, the current leader of the Palestinian Authority and the PLO, was still number 2 in the PLO when Yasser Arafat was still alive. And this happened during the Second Intifada. And you know what that meant, the Second Intifada, on both the Israeli public and the Palestinians, etc., and the various engagements, horrible engagements that took place in those days. He was publicly the only Palestinian official to stand up at the time and say that militarizing the Intifada was wrong. And he went 180 degrees opposed to Yasser Arafat's view on that. Now, when he succeeded, Yasser Arafat, I, along with others who fervently felt that Abu Mazen would be not only willing to come forward and engage with Israel on this issue, but to be the right person that the Israeli leadership would embrace to negotiate with. What happened was, unfortunately, Mr. Sharon at the time, the late Mr. Sharon, treated him in the most contemptible way. I don't know if you remember the pictures of the meetings that they had between Mr. Sharon and Mr. Abbas the first time that they met after he became the leader of the Palestinians. Sharon just wouldn't give him the time of day and went out of his way publicly to denigrate him and to bring him down. And that had its effect. Its effect was to make Mr. Abbas look small in the eyes of the Palestinian people. And the continued policy that Israeli governments have taken since Mr. Sharon, whether under Ehud Barak or under Ehud Olmert or under Benjamin Netanyahu, have equally not given Mr. Abbas any credit that he could take back to his people and show them that his view of having peaceful negotiations with Israel is the right way to go. So I would blame the Israeli leadership for making Mr. Abbas lose credibility with his own people. But that is no excuse. that is politics. And in politics, you can play some games that perhaps are not kosher, if I may use that word,
We
in
say
other
halal
events.
here, but it's okay.
So I think Mr. Abbas is the right leader. And as he has shown his commitment to a peaceful solution to the Israeli-Palestinian problem, he should be given the chance to be the one that signs the final agreement with the Israelis. I could go on longer than that, but I think I made my point that you're not going to get a better leader to be committed to the peace process than Mr. Abbas.
Let me widen the circle a bit and ask you if any of the successive American administrations, and I hope that you will comment on this one as well, have been the kind of third party that you would hope for in order to push this forward? And if not, again, why do you think that is?
And the issue of peace in the Arab world, and particularly with Israel, America has always been the major player from outside the area. And that has been with the full support of Saudi Arabia, because we believe that it is America that has the moral authority to inject the right injections at the right time to make this process complete. Unfortunately, for a period of time, particularly during the past administration, what I would use to describe, and I still describe it, as the big bear behind us pushing us to take difficult positions. That bear retreated. It was no longer pushing. Made a lot of verbal comments on the issue, but didn't really sincerely push us. And what I understand from the present administration is that Mr. Trump is very sincere in reaching a deal, as he calls it, for this issue to be resolved. And just today I heard, and it was in the news, that in the past, I think, few days or a week or so, there was a delegation from the United States headed by Mr. Kushner and Mr. Greenblatt that visited the area to pursue the discussions on having peace with Israel. This is good news to me, because it shows not only that the President is committed to pushing for it, but also that they are consulting with all of their friends in the area, and that will help in bringing a consensus to exist for peace in the issue of Palestine and Israel. This is what we need. We need America to be there pushing, and because imagine if you have reluctant audiences, whether in government or in the public, on either side, who do not want to have peace. Well, the leadership can then tell them, look, we have this big bear behind us pushing us. And if we don't go along with what they want, they're going to be angry at us. And that is helpful, I think, to convince the recalcitrants from being recalcitrant anymore.
Before I move on to Iran, which I would like to do, I just want to see if I can get you into a little bit of trouble. Which administration do you think was more helpful in the Middle East? The previous administration or the current administration?
All administrations have, this one is still too young to bear any judgment on.
He's a diplomat, remember.
Well, you know, my late brother, who was a foreign minister, taught me when I became ambassador that a diplomat is he who says yes when he means maybe, and he will say maybe when he means no. But if he says no, then he's no diplomat. So previous administrations, we've had ups and downs. Yani, Obama administration, for example, worked with Saudi Arabia closely, and as I mentioned, there were verbal exercises by the president on the two-state solution. He was the first to appoint a representative like Senator Mitchell, if you remember, to follow the peace process in his first administration and so on. So we worked with Mr. Obama on an issue. But then by the end of his term, I think he just withdrew from pushing anymore on that. So that was not helpful. Before that, Mr. Bush had also an engagement with us. Of course, at that time, we went through the awful issue of September 11th and its ramifications and so on. And yet it was during Mr. Bush's time that the meeting in Annapolis, if you remember, in 2007 took place that brought Israel with the Arab countries and the Americans to talk about peace. This present administration, as I told you, Mr. Trump has publicly, and for the first time of any president, told Mr. Netanyahu that he must stop the settlements. This, from our point of view, it was not only courageous, but it was the right thing to do. Because if Israel continues to take land from the Palestinians before any agreement is reached, then what is the value of agreement? And so Mr. Trump has shown that he has the political courage to publicly say, stop the settlements. And he's also said that he wants to reach a deal. My point is that I wish him the best of luck, and also that we hope that he will succeed. But we'll have to wait and see.
Thank you for that answer, which crossed many interesting fault lines I could see in the faces of the audience. I want to move on to Iran because we don't have that much time left, and it is in some ways the most pressing issue, perhaps apart from North Korea, that faces the United States at the moment. I wonder if you were given the presidency for a day, would you have decertified the Iran deal? And do you think that the Congress ought to cancel the deal? And as a diplomat, do you believe that a better deal could be cobbled together with the other partners if it was canceled?
At the moment, I think what the president has announced is the right thing to do, which is to declare that he is not going to certify the deal and ask from the Congress to set up a program of sanctions against Iran that will show that their commitment to the deal has not lived up to what was expected from them when the deal was signed, because they have not lived up to the commitments of the deal that was signed, whether it is not just on nuclear issues, but also the other issues that were included in the deal, which was for Iran to be a better partner for the world community in the area there, and not to be what it is already, which is an interfering and a destabilizing force in the area. King Salman issued a statement when President Trump made this declaration, declaring Saudi Arabia's support for the president's position. Now, one thing I think that I can, on a personal basis, because I do not represent my government, I can say is the deal should be improved so that all nuclear proliferation in the area can be prohibited without exception. And that is the only way you can do that is if you have a zone free of weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. That will include all the countries from Iran across to Mauritania on the Atlantic, including Turkey and Israel, and of course all the Arab countries, where weapons of mass destruction will be prohibited. And you can do that. There is already in process under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference that is held at the United Nations, a process to have a Congress or a meeting of the countries involved to reach this zone free of weapons of mass destruction. That's where we should spend the next 15 years, which is the duration of this present deal, to build up the zone free of weapons of mass destruction. Because the present deal, one of its basic faults, and it is a major fault, is that it opens the door to proliferation. It allows Iran to enrich uranium. So if Iran is allowed to enrich uranium, other countries will equally feel, empowered to enrich uranium. We should get away from that. We should have a ban on all the countries in the area from enriching uranium, and you can only do that if you have a zone free of weapons of mass destruction.
Well, I would like to ask about that because, as you know, there is a rumor that Israel has a weapon of mass destruction, unconfirmed. But I understand in theory that all weapons of mass destruction are terrible. But I also understand in theory that all guns can be dangerous, but you want them in the hands of the police and not in the hands of the criminals. And I wonder if it is a fair equivalence to say, if Israel has a nuclear weapon, then of course other countries will want one, when I don't really believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that anyone in the Arab world believes that Israel has that weapon for offensive purposes.
We don't have to look at what Arab leaders say. Look at what Israeli leaders say. And all of them have said that Israel will use whatever means in its hands to defend itself. Fine. And if that were confined to conventional weapons, yes. But to be the only country in the area with deployable and usable nuclear weapons, it's not reassuring what the Israeli leaders say. Because they, by implication, tell us that if they need to use their nuclear weapons, they will do so. And we've seen in the memoirs of officials like Mr. Kissinger and others who operated in the area, particularly during the Ramadan War back in 1973, that at that time Mrs. Golda Meir did hint at the possibility of using the arsenal that they had of nuclear weapons. So these are things that are not reassuring to us on the Arab side. And that's why I say that we should have a zone where all of us should be committed and not just one or two countries. And whether Israel will or will not do that, that's up for the Israelis to decide. But if they're given the opportunity to be members of a club where all of them are treated equally, I think that will raise the moral level rather than be negatively effective on it. And Israel will not then be an excuse either for Iran or for any other country to want to try to develop nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction.
Well, not to beat a dead horse.
Okay.
But
I agree.
But one ritual flogging won't matter. So if they were all part of the same club, I would agree with you. But if Israel is the only nation in the Middle East whom every other nation around them has on its enemies list, while many of them may be enemies with one another, there are none of them that don't have either an older or newer sense of animosity towards Israel, then to ask them to join the same demilitarized club or denuclearized club seems to me unrealistic at best, because you're denuding them of the one country that doesn't have allies in fact, speaking of Israel is actually the only unallied country in the world. It doesn't belong to the Arab League, it doesn't belong to NATO, it doesn't belong to the OAU, it's just Israel. And so when you feel that alone, to say, I know you feel alone, but you should take away that weapon and all of us won't get one too, is a false equivalence, no?
That's why I tell you that the Arab world has crossed the Rubicon. The Arab Peace Initiative tells Israel, you're going to be a full partner. Let's have peace. Let's get over this suspicion and this animosity that we have towards each other. You feeling threatened by being surrounded by millions, if not billions, of Arabs and Muslims, and we feeling that you have wrongly occupied territory and taken it from Arab lands and from Arab peoples and so on. Let's get over that. And within the process of having peace with Israel, you can have the zone whereby everybody is equal. And this is where, on both sides, we have to show sincerity. And to guarantee that, one of the things you can have, of course, is the full participation of the United States, which, by the way, and Israel's alliance with the United States more than makes up for its not being a member of NATO or a member of the European Union or a member of the Arab League. Just look at how much Israel gets from the United States. And if I remember, and you all must remember, in 1973, when Israel was down on her knees, it was the United States that came to the rescue and actually transported material like tanks and artillery and other things to the battle lines directly for Israel to defend itself at that time. So Israel's alliance with the United States, I think, is the biggest safeguard for Israel in the area. Now, to get back to what I was saying, with peace, we won't have the suspicions or the animosity or the belief that we are against each other, but rather that we will be with each other. And that's the proposition, I think, that any forward-looking leader in Israel should espouse, rather than keep believing that Israel is going to be constantly the enemy of these Arab countries around it.
We have time for two more questions. Before I get to my final question for you, I want to ask what may be a difficult question to answer, emotionally difficult, which is, how deep is anti-Semitism in the Arab world? And I don't mean anti-Israel sentiment. I mean the hotel rooms where you can read about the protocols of the Elders of Zion, the shows that say that the Jews control all the banks. In other words, good old-fashioned classic anti-Semitism. How deep is that in the Arab world and the Muslim world?
I think it is superficial. And I think it is the result of the politics in the area, rather than a deep sentiment on the part of the peoples on either side, whether Christian Arabs or Muslim Arabs. Because it's when you look at historical precedent, about engagement between Jews and Arabs and Muslims and so on, they all had their ups and downs, and they've all had lived in communities together. Many of you come from places where you've had either lives, or some of you had rough times, some of you didn't. But my belief is that this anti-Semitism was an import to the Arab and Muslim world from Europe. And it was the exercise of European societies against their Jewish communities that transported into the Arab and Muslim world, mainly as a result of the creation of Israel in 1948. But I want to look to the future. I want to see a time when I, as an Arab, can go to Israel and enjoy visiting the sites there. I want to go to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I want to be able to visit the tombs of the prophets. As you know, the prophets of the Jews are our prophets as well. I want to be able to go to Haifa and Jaffa and all of the other places and enjoy the scenery and enjoy the life and the music and the culture of the Israelis. And I would want to welcome to Saudi Arabia any of you or any of the Israeli citizens who may want to come and visit the kingdom and share with us our culture and our enterprises. So this is what I'm looking forward to, is going over the negative aspects of the animosity that has arisen over the past few years and look for a more peaceful and enjoyable time together.
Before we close, I know that there was a ripple of skepticism. I think that many of the people may disagree with you about the depth of that anti-Semitism and even some of the causes of it. But I think that makes it that much more impressive and us that much more grateful that you are willing to come to a synagogue in front of a group of Jews and say what you believe. And I want to say how grateful we are that you have come. And I want you to also know...
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I want you to also know that without letting the cat out of the turban out of the bag, whatever is the proper term, His Royal Highness and I did actually discuss a Sinai delegation to Saudi Arabia, and who knows, that would be a fantastic experience, and I hope that we will be able to do that at some point in the not too distant future. But your openness to all of this is a wonderful thing, and I can certainly imagine how it would be difficult for your equivalent to go before a mosque and do what you have just done, which is to come before a group that you know may not hold the same views and speak them so eloquently. So let me close with this. I can't imagine a more intimate acquaintance with human nature than somebody who spent a lifetime in diplomacy. So whatever our views may be, we're all human beings. What have you learned about human beings and human nature from so many years of negotiating with so many different people and traveling all over the world? And I'd like to begin, actually, your answer with the beautiful answer you gave me in the car when I asked you, what's your favorite place to visit?
My answer was, wherever I have friends. And, you know, human beings can be really cruel to each other. We see that every day in our lives. But on the other side, they can also be exaltingly angelic in providing medical treatment for the needy, or shelter for someone who doesn't have shelter, or food for someone who's going hungry. It's fortunately for humanity that there are people who do that as well. And we have to take the good with the bad. And hopefully, by our own exercise, overcome the bad for the good. And now that I have so many friends in Los Angeles has become one of my favorite cities.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
David Halprin.